All right, welcome to the Business Analytics Webinar Marathon. We are super excited you could join us today for Ginger Grant's session on implementing database decision making. My name is Dan English, and I have a few quick introduction slides before I hand over the reins to Ginger Grant. Next slide. If you require technical assistance, please type your question into the question pane located on the right side of your screen, and someone will assist you. This question pane is also where you may ask any questions throughout the presentation, and then we'll queue those up and we'll ask the presenter at the end in the Q&A portion of the session. I'll read your questions aloud to the speaker and we'll get the responses. You are able to zoom in and out of the presentation content by using the zoom button located on the top of the presentation window. Note that there will be a short evaluation at the end of this session as well to get your feedback, and that feedback is very important, so please take a moment to complete it for us. It will appear in your web browser. Next slide. If you like what you hear today in these webinars, make sure to attend the Past Business Analytics Conference taking place May 2nd through the 4th in San Jose, California, with hands-on lab learning opportunities from data and business analytics experts and a variety of networking opportunities. The Past Business Analytics Conference is a great opportunity to gain valuable skills and advance your career. All webinar registrants today get a $100 off the two-day pass conference fee. Just use the discount code BAMarathon during the registration process. Visit pastbaconference.com to register today, as the discount code expires on January 1st. Next slide. If you're interested in accessing other free educational content, the PASS organization has a variety of virtual chapters which offer free webinars to their members every month. Check out upcoming webinars and recordings of past webinars from your business analytics, Excel BI, business intelligence, big data, and cloud virtual chapters by visiting sequelpass.org/VC. Next slide. This Business Analytics Marathon session is presented by Ginger Grant. Ginger is a business intelligence consultant, a machine learning practitioner, a database solution designer, and a Power BI application integrator. You can check out Ginger on Twitter and her blog at desertislesequel.com and Twitter handle desertislesequel. Next slide. And without further ado, here's Ginger Grant with Implementing Database Decision Making.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone, for taking time out of your busy day to attend today. And as we were talking about, as I was thinking about giving this talk, I was thinking about an old Dilbert cartoon where they were playing buzzword bingo. And to play, you need a card filled with buzzwords, and if you get all the words, hey, you win bingo. And if you're creating one of these cards, chances are you might come up with the phrase database decision making or self-service BI. But these are more than buzzwords. These words actually have meaning. Today I would like to better define what the phrase means so that you can go beyond the buzzwords to think about how you can assist in your organization's operations. There are technical solutions that can be provided that you need to do to implement database decision making, and I'm going to show that with Power BI. But what I really want to talk about are the stuff that are non-technical. What are the soft skills about this? What needs to really change to implement database decision making is not just the technology, but also create an environment where database decision making can thrive. So does this look like something that you might have in your organization? As a consultant, I go to a number of different companies, and I often see IT and business analysts kind of like pulling back and forth. That tends to be the interaction in some level, you know, especially when it's talking about data. Well, why is this? Well, each group has different goals. IT is looking to have a repeatable process which is scalable. IT is tasked with making sure that nothing goes down, that everything is up, that you can add more data to it, and everything will work just fine. They use this kind of knowledge to determine when to give people when to grant access. Well, oftentimes this puts them in conflict with business users because business users want all the data and they can't understand why IT doesn't want to let them have all the data. Well, I can tell you from experience that in many organizations, when the data has granted all the access that the business team needs to do, say queries, for example, problems get started. Where I was working, they took down, some user took down the reporting database because they were writing a query that was not very good, and it sucked up all the resources, and we ended up having to kill it because nobody else could do any reports. Um, I work for a consulting company, Pragmatic Works, and we actually had a client that had a similar issue, except for the fact that it impacted their ability for people to access their ATMs because the bank ATM information was the same as reporting. So I mean, there's all sorts of issues that may not come into mind necessarily when it comes to granting access, but those are the kind of issues that IT is thinking about. But the business users are looking at, and it's like they just want to provide the answers. People are asking questions of them. Hey, can you find this out for me? What's the trend here? What's the data telling me? What does the data look like? And they need to be able to provide those answers, and they need data to be able to do that. The other thing that is a really big need for business analyst users is automated monthly processing. Now, I will say automated because in nearly all of the organizations that I have worked with, the automated processing involves, in some way, shape, or form, we take this information from here and then we dump it to Excel. And dumping it to Excel is part of their monthly process. And some of these dumping data initiatives end up taking a lot of time and are really difficult if you don't have key people there because they're rather complicated. Another problem with these kinds of processes is that it need to validate data. Data starts out being from the same place, so you should always get the same answer. Well, if a lot of people are generating their own data, there may be a lot of time spent in why the data is different. There could be a number of reasons for it. I worked at a place where they were doing all sorts of data reporting using Excel, and they reported based on when they refreshed the screen. So if you had two people, they might have different data because somebody refreshed it yesterday and somebody refreshed it today. So just things like that will cause reports to be different and incorrect. Now, do the reports work? Did the business users create a solution? Well, yes, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a couple of holes in them that probably need to be resolved. So what really needs to happen is that instead of pulling against each other, these two groups really need to work more closely together to be able to provide the information needed so that database decision making can happen. So what needs to happen for that? Well, we need to build a collaboration model. I recommend starting with a report, and the reason why is that one of the things that people, business analysts versus IT, tend to look at data completely differently. A lot of times, the only way that the business analyst knows about the data is what the report says. Oh, that information is from the 457 report. That report is their whole world for where the data lives. That, generally speaking, means absolutely nothing to the IT staff. Now, they can generally go and find out what field in the database that report is using, but if your people start talking about reports, then they have to go look it up to be able to find meaning on it. So I think it's a good place to start to actually get the teams talking together is starting with a report. And then you need to develop a data model. And why is that? Well, everybody already has data. It's not unique or, it would be unique if you didn't have it. Everyone has their systems now. It's just a matter of how they integrate and how that they are working together. And a lot of times they don't. So that data model needs to be developed, and this probably doesn't exist in your organization now. There's probably a data silo somewhere where this data doesn't integrate with the rest of it, or we report on this separately, and somebody would really like to be able to bring all that data together. And that's really what the data model's for. It's for bringing data together from different sources, because I'm sure that you have the ability to generate reports right now out of an existing system, but if we're talking database decision making, we're generally talking about more than that. So once this data model is created, it's not done yet. If the IT team creates a model and doesn't show people how to use it, then it's not going to help anything. And the IT team has, generally speaking, spent a lot of time, effort, and energy learning about how to put data models together. And so that's where they have their area of expertise. That's their skills. The business team knows if the data is correct. at a glance. I was working on a data warehouse project not too long ago, and we were generating reports, and we'd give them to the business users, and they would take a glance at them like, no, those numbers are all wrong. And I would ask, well, what's wrong with them? And they said, well, they don't look right. And I understood what they meant. What they meant was that they had the ability and the business knowledge to tell at a glance where the values that I was representing on that report had anything to do with what they were expecting to see. And that's crucial to determine whether or not your model is any good. So once this has been created, then what the IT team needs to do is they need to be able to give people access to that data, and then establish methods for updating the data in an appropriate frequency manner. One of the things that is important to represent that IT needs to know is they need to know about all the data that's being used in the organization. I know a lot of times, especially when it comes to things like sales commissions or budgets, a lot of those exist on a spreadsheet. Spreadsheet is still the largest single store of data in the world. I mean, more people have spreadsheets that have various data on it than they do any single other kind of database. I mean, think about it. I mean, for example, my mom's not that technical, but boy, she's got an Excel spreadsheet or two, but database, no. So Excel is really where a lot of the data is stored. If people are using Excel for their reports and they're analyzing it based on that, that needs to be part of the model. And the updates that need to be included in the model. And I know this is kind of, you know, a non-traditional way, and IT generally doesn't incorporate that, but they really should, because everything needs to be included and needs to be visible so that it can be maintained going forward. So I hinted at this before, but what's really important is to use the existing areas of expertise. The business team needs to develop samples of the reports that they're looking to create. Generally speaking, when this kind of data initiative comes about, we're looking to answer questions. And if we're looking to answer questions, chances are you don't have all of the data in one place, or the data is not available. One thing that is really important to know is that I know that the business teams are very creative, and if the data is not available, they tend to merge the information together to make that happen. And they can be extremely successful at doing it. It isn't, generally speaking, the most efficient thing to do. I was recently at an engagement, and I was helping create a model in Power BI, and we took somebody's reporting task from like half a day affair, because they got the information from a couple of different places and put it together, to a here's a button, push it. So it's not that business team hasn't become really good at creating, you know, these kinds of reports, but it's not necessarily the most efficient way of doing that. And having the data team create the model can help the true automation. I know that a lot of times for accounting, especially when the books are closed, there's another week and a half of work that they do. And that a lot of that work can be automated. It generally isn't. It's something that's happened all the time. And they need to work together to make sure that all the needed data is available. I worked with one team, and they compared some of their sales and projection information with some government reporting information that came out quarterly. Well, they need that data. There's no reason why that data shouldn't and couldn't exist in a data source so that it can be used side by side with the stuff from your company. So kind of think out of the box when you're thinking of sources. It doesn't necessarily even need to be a source within your application. And the reason why is you really want to create a repeatable process. Another job that I worked on was there was somebody who was a really good business analyst, and she rarely took vacation. And she was responsible for creating a number of different reports, and the processes for doing this were complicated. And after 2 days, her replacement said, I can't do this. This is just insane. All the stuff that I have to remember, I don't want to do. This is just impossible. And so they gave it to me, and by the time she came back from her extended medical leave, all that work that she was spending all morning doing was automated at a push of a button. So then she was able to do real analysis. And that's part of the goal of doing this. As part of doing database analysis, you need to spend time actually reviewing the data, not putting together reports, copying information from an SSRS report and putting it into Excel and putting things into Access, it'll work, grant you, but it's not the most efficient way of doing it. And if you're spending all of your time doing processes like that, which can be automated, then you don't have enough time left over to start analyzing and looking at trends and trying to think of more meaningful ways to present the data. So that's why this is, really crucial. So what do I talk about when I talk about a sample model? Well, we need to provide data from all applicable sources, Excel spreadsheets, various systems, and oh, by the way, the defined fields need to have meaning. Don't know about where you worked or if you know any place that's like this, but if you ever worked where they have like little yellow stickies on the side of their monitor with what the codes mean or what the abbreviations mean, that's really, really old school, and there's no for that anymore. There's no reason that a translation layer needs to be erected so that people know what the data means. You should know what the data means because you can read it and it makes sense. So when creating systems really needs to be an important evaluation because you don't want to spend, again, all sorts of time on the translation of various fields when you could be instead spending your valuable time on analyzing the data. So when you create names that people use. I worked at a place recently, and they said, well, we don't really need to do that because everybody knows what a 101 is, and there's no reason for that. And I said, well, okay. Do you ever hire new people? And they stopped. Yes, of course you hire new people. So even if everybody in your organization knows what the code means, hey, at some point in time, you may want to hire a new person, and you want that new person to get up to speed quickly, and that's how you can make that happen by understand. It is really important. And the one thing that I think is really important is that the business analyst team needs to expose all the information that they're using. I worked on a system recently where a new accounting system was implemented, and we thought that we were working with the users to determine what they needed for data. And when the new accounting system came online and the reports were made available to them, they were screaming, and they said, we can't use this. This doesn't work. It doesn't do anything we need. And we asked them, well, why? And they said, well, we need to get the data from the reports. And the question was, well, what data? Well, they had developed an entire reporting hierarchy system based on several reports which were not created the same way in the old system and the new system, and if they didn't have the data presented in that way, then they couldn't provide upper management the information that they needed. They didn't even think to ask because they just figured that all accounting systems would have this report and then they would be fine. Well, no. And for two, if it's very important to have a data in a specific format, you need to tell people. I was working in a team recently with the IT director, and the business analyst says, well, there's no point in me asking for that. I'm just going to get it out of the report because IT won't give it to me. And I turned to the guy, I'm like, Bill, is that how you work? He's like, no. He's like, no, that's not it. He said, I don't know where you heard that. Maybe that was somebody else, but he said, if you need the data, I'll give it to you. And if that isn't the case in your organization, maybe you can work to help provide it that way, because the data doesn't need to be owned by anyone. Data needs to be provided for people to do their jobs, and if they don't do that, then they can't do database decision making. One other thing to remember too is that a lot of times various hierarchies are commonly used within organizations, and this is something that's often overlooked. For example, if you tend to roll up certain teams together in a hierarchy and somebody would like to look at that information in a higher level, that information is created in your data source. And that way, if you want to create, say, an Excel report and you have the numbers all the way rolled up, then you don't have to define it every single time. So the hierarchies can be universally applied to everyone. So whenever practical, they really should be created. All right, so what am I talking about when I'm talking about a data model? What I'm talking about is I'm talking about something like this. Granted, this is a very simple data model, but it shows the keys and the data joined together. Now, this is not something that I think that necessarily can be done contrary to a lot of companies' websites that are selling self-service business intelligence. They're like, oh yeah, anybody can like put data together and join it, and then you can do reports. Well, that's true that anybody can do it, but there are benefits to having people do it who have been practicing at it and who are good at it, because you can box yourself into a corner and not even know it because this isn't your area of expertise. So it's very important that companies provide areas of expertise, and use them within their organization. One of the things that I have seen with self-service BI, especially if it's done based on reporting, is a lot of times that things are done at different granularities. For example, if you have information that is stored at a monthly level, this is really common if you're talking about, say, budgets. Nobody budgets down to the day. A lot of people report down to the day, but they don't budget down to the day. Well, if you don't know exactly how to do those kinds of adjoins, then you won't be able to show information except at the month level, or you may not be able to do it. Another thing that if models are created without the assistance of IT using existing data sources, is that the existing data sources, generally speaking, were designed to be somewhat user-friendly, and keys are not exposed. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, for example, you can call something Western region, and generally speaking in your report, you're just going to use the words Western region. Now, you could join the information on Western region to another data source that says Western region, and it'll match. Unless, there happens to be somebody type West region one time, or the name got changed to, West plus Hawaii, and then it wouldn't work. What will work is if you use the underlying data keys, and these information isn't necessarily exposed in reports if you go and create this yourself, which is why it is important to integrate the data team with it. So I know that if you've been reading about self-service BI and empowering users to do it, they encourage all business analysts to do everything. And while I'm not saying that you can't, I'm saying that it is more efficient if you let people use the skills that they bring to the table. And generally speaking, if you have spent a number of years learning dimensional modeling, you're probably better at it than somebody who's just started doing it. And conversely, if you're really good at creating financial statements, then that's probably something that you're really good at versus making sure that the database is got full referential integrity. So the roles that have been defined within organizations need to be used, but need to be used appropriately, and get away from the control issue of, well, this is what I do and this is what you do, and not ever get in the middle of it. The important thing when these models are created, it's important that when IT creates them, that they provide information needed so that the business users know what they mean. This can be done through various hover-overs, having real names, descriptions. There are various tools that can be created, but I think it's really important that people know what the data means and where the data is sourced. If people want data from a specific place, if they also want to know, hey, where's this from? Is this from the accounting system, or is this from the inventory system? Because they're not the same systems. That kind of information needs to be exposed so people know when they gather data from different sources where it comes from. And this needs to be explained very well, and not just be the realm of IT. IT's job needs to be able to explain this to business users. So what is the business team going to be using with a model, and why is having a model important in doing database decision making? Well, let's face it, data is extremely extremely touchy subject. Security needs to be provided. One of the things that you may know or you may not know, is when people talk about Power BI, Microsoft sort of changed the name of what that tool is. And one of the reasons that they changed it from being an add-on in Excel, which is not after December of last year, to a web-based solution is to provide security, because there are a lot of companies that said, well, if I have all that data in my spreadsheet, what's to prevent somebody from putting that on a thumb drive and providing it to my competitors? Well, nothing. So data really does need to be secure. The use of the data needs to be collaborative. Various people need to provide environments so that they can work together. Data models don't need to have the same things for all people. There is no Lord of the Rings, one version to rule them all necessarily, because there's information that people either do not need, or there's information which they shouldn't have for security reasons. And it needs to be maintained so that over time that people can use it and be confident that it is complete and correct. One of the tool that I recommend for doing this kind of collaboration is with Power BI, and the reason why is it provides this information in a secure environment. Now, I know a lot of people may be wondering, why did Power BI go out of Excel? You know, what was the reasons for that? Well, there were a number of them. One of them is that it was a big problem, and I saw this in a number of environments, of everybody having the same version of Excel. The other thing is that if you have, say, a 32-bit version of Excel and somebody else has a 64-bit version of Excel, the amount of data that you can look at changes greatly. And a lot of problems were with halting. A lot of times IT had basically for years said, well, we don't really need better hardware because nobody's really using the hardware that they've got. Well, when you went to putting a whole bunch of data in Excel, that all changed. And the hardware that you have is very important if you are running a Power Pivot model within Excel. And this proved to be pretty problematic. And then there's the security issue. So for these reasons, Microsoft came up with the Power BI tool in December of last year that separates the functionality of data modeling and presentation from Excel. Now, I say separates it from. I'm not saying that you can't do it in Excel. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of you do. But this is another tool and a method of organizing your data. And I recommend doing it over Excel because it offers some benefits. For one, your refresh capability is much better. You don't have to worry about hardware issues between various members of the team. It provides an ability to have a mobile solution. I know that a lot of places wonder how much a mobile solution is important in their environment. Well, you may not think it's important, but I guarantee you that if you move up high enough the food chain, your manager thinks it's important. I was literally working in a place where the CEO said, I want to look at my reports when I'm brushing my teeth. Okay, you're not going to be able to do that with Excel. And there are other solutions that Microsoft has come out with, DataZen, that provides that as well. But Power BI is another way that you could do a mobile deployment without any particular effort on your part. One of the things that I wanted to bring up too is Power BI comes in multiple versions. It comes in a free version and a pay version. And oh, by the way, while it is not directly tied with Office 365, I'm going to show you a feature that I think is really important for using it that is part of Office 365. What does that mean? That means in addition, Power BI Professional is $9.99 a month. So if you want to use the features that I'm going to demonstrate here in a minute, you also have to have an Office 365 Exchange client for people within your organization. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, what the heck do I need that for? We've got all of our mail in an Exchange server over in the server room. What do we need to do this for? One of the really powerful aspects of Power BI is the ability to create groups. And groups are not technically part of Power BI. They are part of Office 365. So if you want to use groups, you have to purchase Exchange licenses along with Power BI in order to make that happen. So what's a workspace and what are groups and what am I talking about? Well, this workspace is for me. I logged into this site. It's under my name. And this is my site, and this is what I see. So I have the ability to create and work on information within here, and it's available to me. And this could be my workspace where I would develop various things, and the models that I use are stored in the cloud and are based upon models that have been created. Now, there's a number of ways you can create models within Power BI. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to use the desktop client, which I showed you, to create a model at all. You can directly connect to a single source. But generally speaking, I think that you can find more value in connecting to multiple data sources, and connecting to multiple data sources means you're going to have a data model that shows you how the information is all tied together. One of the things that people are looking at in reporting now is a picture can tell 1,000 words, and so people have a better understanding of data by looking at it in a dashboard format, or just to see things at a glance, so that they see things really quickly, to look at the geographic representation and then be able to look at the details based on certain areas, and watch the numbers change, real time when I do this. So so with Power BI, in order for this to work, I wanted to use a workspace so that I can I can work on my reports, but I can work in teams and groups. And if I click on the workspace here, I've got several workspaces to choose from. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the Power BI group because I want to share things from people within this user group. Now notice when I do this, I have a completely different environment show up. So this is the environment that works in my Power BI group. Notice the stuff that I all have in all my stuff is different. It's not the same, so that this group can be created and have their own information separate from other groups. They don't necessarily have to have everything joined together. So who's in this group? Well, it's whoever. Let's go see. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the dots here, and I'm going to go ahead and look at members. And if I click on members, note that I'm opening up Office 365 here. And if I open up Office 365, then I will see the people in my groups. So if you want to create workspaces, this is why you need to have Office 365, and you can see that these are the groups that are available, and these are the people that are in them. These groups actually are part of Exchange, so that I could actually send an email to everybody in the Power BI group as well. So I effectively have the ability to create email groups when I'm creating groups within Power BI, and see that there are different ones and they have different people in them, some of the same people. And that's what groups do for you. So you could organize your reports within people in your organization so that not everything is available to everybody, making it more secure. Now the data set, how I recommend that you do data sets is you create a model and put it on a OneDrive, then you can refresh the model. I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of Power BI because there's a lot of really good sessions on the very technical information about how Power BI works, but what I think it is a really good model of for integrating the way that IT works and for the ability to business analyst works. So in this environment, the IT group would be responsible for creating the model, and what I anticipate is the business users would be empowered to create all the reports and dashboards needed to for people in their group, so that they can create information because they have the information available to them to do whatever that they need to do, and do it from within this environment. Because if you are developing within the Power BI Cloud Workspace, then your hardware is not important, and hardware is getting to be a really big issue when it comes to huge amounts of data, because then you can't access all the data because your machine bogs down. If you put it up in Power BI, that problem goes away because you are using the server memory rather than your memory, and you can expose things to people. The security model provides the ability for people to either have edit rights or view rights, and so that you can be certain that the information is secure. It works very similar to Power View. If you're familiar with that within Excel, clicking on it provides real-time changes, and so that people can get information that they need, and people can belong to various groups that provide information that is important to them, or they can have workspaces for information that they are interested in. All right, so that was my collaboration with Power BI. So just in summary, what I was hoping to do is structure is provide information so that you could build a structure to capitalize on the skills of your team. Don't put all of the design work on the business analyst team. Have them give them the tools that they need to be able to create reports. Let the IT teams create the models and put the information together in a way that can be repeatable. One of the reasons that I went to a client recently was because the auditors refused to certify their financial statements because they couldn't be confident that the data was complete and correct because all of the information was taken out of the accounting system and put into Excel then generated. Well, that can be very problematic. So it's not something that a lot of companies are finding acceptable going forward. And every single company I've been to, there's some component of that going on. So that really needs to be something that we look to eliminate. The data provided needs to be a comprehensive view of the business operations. Data oftentimes lives in silos. Various information is available to some people in different databases for different reasons. A lot of times this data needs to be brought together. Sometimes that's relatively easy and sometimes it's very difficult. Some data doesn't join very well. And the IT teams, generally speaking, are the ones that are probably better at figuring out how that you can get the two things to relate. There are a number of ways you can do it. Of course, the idea being to provide a very efficient way of doing this. We want to create automated monthly processes, not automated, before and not now. I was working at a client recently, and their entire monthly process had been designed around creating account-based reports. That's what was the system automatically generated. Well, they got a new manager in, and they didn't want account-based reports anymore. They wanted customers and customer regions. Well, the system wasn't set up to do that, and nobody in IT went and changed it because either they weren't told or they didn't provide the information to be able to do that. So they didn't have reporting that did that. So what happened is the BA team created all that information, and it worked very well, but it was very cumbersome, and it wasn't very scalable, and it ended up taking a lot of people a number of hours every week to be able to make that happen. We want to get out of that. If people are spending a whole bunch of time putting data together, then they're not spending time looking at what the data actually says. So the data processes need to be really automated, not just kind of automated, and then we go do stuff. And they need to be exposed. Don't just assume that IT is always going to turn you down every time you ask for something. And IT also needs to turn around and not turn data requests down at all times. They need to ensure that the data is completely and constantly correct. The data cannot be stale. The data cannot run out over time. That it needs to be in a way that's secure. There is getting to be a real big problem with theft of data within organizations. So having giant amounts of information in Excel a lot of times isn't considered acceptable just because of data theft. Data is gold now. It's a proprietary information. It's, some companies that is their product is the data. So having it in a secure environment like the cloud is very important from just a management perspective, which is why Power BI is a good tool. The other thing that I want to encourage you to do is there's a lot of hype out there about various tools and what you can do to make things happen very quickly. While you can make things happen very quickly, I think it's important to remember to make them happen well, and to do that, a lot of thought needs to go into not only what your technical solution is, but what your business solution is, so that you will be able to marry the two together to get a complete solution. So with that, I do blog quite a bit about Power BI. I am speaking at the PASS Business Analytics Conference here coming up in May, and I'm really way too accessible on Twitter. So if you have any questions that you don't feel like asking right now, you want to go forward, just hit me up on Twitter, and be happy to answer any questions. I also am going to be having a blog post on my blog about this talk with some additional information for you. So are there any questions?
All right, super. Thank you, Ginger. That was great. We do have some questions, and as Ginger noted, she will make a blog post and have the content posted there. The presentation content is already on the webinar registration page. If you click on the sessions, you'll get access to the content, or at least the presentation. And these are all being recorded, and I would assume by the end of next week, the recording should be made available on the past BA conference website. So let's start with some questions here. You stated that IT is supposed to provide the answers to questions asked. How do we train the business to ask better questions?
That's a really good question, because a lot of times people get into mind frames where they just assume that they can't have the answers, and so they quit asking them. A lot of times it comes from the upper levels of management because they have certain questions that they want asked, and it's a matter, and that's generally speaking who is asking the questions, and the idea is to get that information filtered down to the people who can provide the solutions. And where the information is not available, the business analyst needs to be able to feel empowered to say, I don't have that information, can IT give it to me? And IT needs to be able to turn around and not have the immediate answer to be no.
All right. In Power BI, is there a way to move your reports from your My Workspace to a group?
Yes, you have the ability to move the to move information from your workspace to the group when you're completed working on it.
All right. And then with Power BI again, is it possible to have the dashboards updated without having to repin them after a data refresh? So have you noticed
Yes.
any issues with that?
I've not run into any issues with data refresh. One of the things that I will say, though, is that Microsoft just improved the data refresh capabilities a week ago. So I did have some problems with the tool working in the past, but they have been making a lot of updates to it. The other thing too is it's important to where you put your information so that it can be refreshed. If you're using an Excel spreadsheet as a data source, you really need to put it in a OneDrive so that you can access it and have it be refreshed. And there's a lot of issues around refresh that have to do with your data sources and making sure that you've got the appropriate access and set up the gateways for that. But yeah, I've not seen any issues with dashboard refreshing. If you've got a specific example or you want to talk to me about it offline, just send me something on Twitter and we can discuss it more.
All right. So how does Power BI differ from, like, say, Tableau or ClickView or even D3 in terms of visualizations?
Well, I will say that Tableau is the prettiest one out there. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the tree map view. Tableau created it. So they are arguably the best in terms of visualizations. However, where they fall down is in the way that their data is joined. There are some data manipulation things that they cannot do. The other thing that Tableau does not do as well as Power BI does is mapping, because the mapping control that Tableau uses is based on I believe it's ClickView is Esri. I don't remember the name of the provider right now for Tableau, but Microsoft uses Bing, and Bing maps are the same as what you find on the website if you go searching for stuff. What that means is that you have the ability to drill down to a lower level in Power BI than you do with any other mapping tools. ClickView, I do not think the visualizations are nearly as good as Tableau by far. I find the user interface to be very kludgy. The biggest thing that I have against Click is if you've ever tried setting that up, it's rather difficult. And keeping it up can be kind of a challenge as well. One thing with Click as well is they assume that they can make your data better for you, so they turn a lot of the tuning capability off because they assume that they've got all that bit handled. and I've seen them be wrong. So hopefully that answers your question.
All right. Can Power BI be used with on-premise data storage rather than cloud storage?
Yes. Microsoft's Gateway provides the ability to have data sources from on-premise that you do not have to have sources in the cloud.
And how does Power BI handle, or does it even provide storyboarding?
I'm not sure what exactly you mean by storyboarding. If you're talking about like a narrative with it, not much, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm guessing they're probably talking about maybe like what you can do with Power Map, maybe?
Yeah, I would have to know what you mean by storyboarding before I could really answer the question, because I'm not really sure what you mean.
Sounds like Tableau might have something called storyboarding.
Maybe.
So, yeah, looks like, yeah, we're getting a lot of feedback. Tableau must have something called that. So,
Okay.
how about, do you suggest regenerating your Power Pivot models in Power BI to start with, or would you just, I guess, are they saying to include the existing one, or would you just create a fresh new one in Power BI?
Well, you can, and actually I have a blog post on this. Take a model from Power Pivot and put it and feed it directly into Power BI Desktop. And as a matter of fact, if you want to create a date dimension, that's the best way of doing it, is doing it in Excel and then bringing it over into Power BI, because then it automatically will have that information for you. So there's no reason to recreate it. You can just read it in.
Okay, I think we've got some time for a few more here. Does Power BI really scale to enterprise scale view of the comprehensive business operations?
Well, I'll be honest with that question. It depends. If you were talking about, can I have, and I was literally at a company that did this, that had something like 15,000 reports. If that is what you consider enterprise, then it won't. I do not remember the upper limit for reports on data sources, but there is one, and I believe it's 500. I'll have to double check on that. So there are some limitations in terms of how many reports that you can use for a single data source. Now, you could also add, duplicate data sources, but so if you have an extremely large scale, you could argue that there are some limitations in Power BI. Now, I will also say that Microsoft is working a lot on continually updating the product. So I don't know that that is going to be true forever, but I would say that you could make that argument now. The other thing, too, is that I do want to make mention is that I saw that Microsoft is now working on creating an on-premises version of Power BI. They posted that in the community forum about a month ago. So it is something that they are actively working on. And before a month ago, I would had said no, they're not interested in doing that, but they announced that they were.
All right. We have someone here. Sounds like they're planning on moving to Office 365. What are some of the requirements to take advantage of Power BI?
It's not as tight as obviously as it once was, and the beauty about having Office 365 is then you will have the groups will be available to you. If you do not have a Office 365 or at least an Exchange client, then you cannot use groups with the paid version of Power BI. On that note too, if you want to have a mix of paid versus free version in your organization using Power BI, you can do that, but the free people can't use any of the paid functions. So generally speaking, that means a lot of things they can't ever access, so you end up paying for it that way. One other thing too that I wanted to bring up thinking about Power BI and the Office 365 environment is that you can share information with people within your domain. So I could share any of my reports with anybody who's got an email address that ends in pragmaticworks.com. but if Dan works for another company, so I could not share any of my reports with him because he doesn't have a pragmaticworks.com email address. So you do not have the ability to share across that way.
All right. Let's see, with Power BI, like other BI tools, what are the limitations or with trying to overcome using different data sources?
One thing that's really kind of neat about Power BI is the number of data sources that you can use. What I see as a problem with joining data sources is you've got disparate data. It's just sometimes rather difficult to put it all together. I mean, figuring out how you can link data together that wasn't linked to begin with, I think is the hardest part, to be honest.
All right, and if someone already has a report that is shared in a content pack, is there any way to add more people or give other people the ability to refresh those reports?
If it's shared within a content pack, which is a feature of Power BI, it depends on if you also used work groups and had them be administrators, then you could. I mean, it's possible. It just depends on how you have it configured, in answer to your question.
All right. Someone had a follow-up question. You mentioned Power BI on-premise. Was there any mention of a time frame with that?
No. Microsoft, previously when they were asked that question, they said, no, it's cloud-based. And now they are saying, we're working on it. So it's a change in answer from them. And I have not seen any updates since last month when they said that they were now working on it. And that's all I know. And that's reported on their site. You can find it, that information on where I saw it, which is in the community.powerbi.com site.
All right, someone's inquiring about, does Power BI replace reporting services, or I guess how do the two compare to each other?
So reporting services provides what they call a pixel perfect report. Reporting services provides a static report that nobody can modify, and that's the beauty of it. I mean, you don't want to modify, you just want a list of data. What Power BI is designed to do is allow users to work with the data by interacting with it, clicking on it, filtering it, and deriving more information based on what they're interested in seeing. If that's what you're interested in doing, then that's what Power BI is good for. If you just want a list of, let's say, if you just want like a list of people and the number of sales they did this month, and if that's all you're interested in, then you would be probably better served for doing an SSRS report. But again, they're complementary, so it depends. I don't see one necessarily replacing the other. Although I have seen people that have moved everything to Power BI, I still think that there are some areas that I think that reporting services does a better job. For one, printing. Power BI does not print well, and if you've got a multi-page report and you want the header and the footer to be just so, it does a much better job than Power BI does.
Someone is inquiring, is reporting services available to render in Office 365 or Power BI?
You cannot put SSRS reports within Power BI, although I understand that is something that Microsoft is also working on.
All right, I'm not sure if you'll have any info on this, but someone is inquiring about how does it compare with Watson Analytics from IBM?
So Watson Analytics is a completely different tool. I get where the allegory comes from, because in the end you get kind of a visualization that you can play with, but Microsoft's answer to Watson is Cortana Analytics. And by Cortana, I don't mean the phone app like Siri. What the idea is that it's a way of putting all your data together and using algorithms to provide an answer. If you're interested in doing that, that's more of a machine learning thing, which is what Watson's doing. What Power BI is doing is saying, here is your data, and this is what it says. Although you can do some predictive analytics in Power BI, the predictive analytics consists of, here's my pattern last year, and it projects it out based on a couple of variables that you can change. Well, that's not anywhere near the stuff that, Watson or Cortana Analytics or machine learning can do. It's like, how many, how many of my customers leave within 3 months, and what are the data points that make that happen? I mean, that's more of a machine learning sorts of question, and that's the kind of thing that Watson does and what machine learning does, Azure Machine Learning does.
All right. Let's see. We might have time here for one more. Someone is inquiring about how do you delineate reports developed by IT versus the business?
I really don't think that IT should necessarily be in the business of creating reports all the time because they aren't as familiar with the needs of the business. So I think that while they do a very good technical job at making sure that everything is lined up, I think that the tool needs to be available so that business users can create reports because they are better aligned into what people are looking for in terms of data and sorting and that sort of information. So I really think that's a task that needs to be moved from IT to your business analysts. And that's more data-driven decision making, because a lot of times there's a big reporting backlog, and by the time IT gets to it, business doesn't care about that anymore.
All right. Okay, we better wrap it up. Thanks for taking all the time to answer all those questions. That's great. Thanks for everyone for posting those as well. Just a reminder that the presentation material is posted on the webinar registration page. If you click on the session, you can get access to the presentation, and these recordings will be made available as well. All right, can we go back to the slides and go to the next slide? All right, do you like what you heard here today? Ginger Grant will be presenting Implementing Successful Data Analytics Management Practices at the PASS Business Analytics Conference next year. That's May 2nd through the 4th in San Jose. Next slide. This Business Analytics Marathon is brought to you by PASS, a not-for-profit organization which offers year-round learning opportunities to data professionals. If you're not a member yet, join today. Membership is free. Just go to SQLpass.org. Next slide. All right, stay tuned for our next session, Tools for Exploratory Data Analysis with Mark Wilcock. All right, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Ginger, for presenting and sharing your knowledge and answering all these questions.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, have a good day, everyone.